Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome the Lawrence County High School Band. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the combined bands of Lawrence County, Loretto, and Summertown High Schools under the guest direction of Dr. Michael Stewart.
right, thank you. Again, thank you all very much for coming out this evening and supporting these amazing students here behind me on this stage. It has been a pleasure to come down here and get a chance to work with these students behind me. I've enjoyed it. It has been extremely brief. To be totally honest with you, we had about 2 hours, as you know, last night to rehearse these pieces for the first time. Thank you. And this is actually the first time we've been able to run the pieces from top to bottom completely, which is always slightly scary at times, to be quite honest with you. A few extra Hail Marys before you step up here. But they've done an amazing job. The last piece we just did, Down in Country Lane, by Aaron Copeland, that's a collegiate level piece. That's a piece I've done with college bands. Extremely difficult. Key signatures, notes. It's just a very mature piece, and I would argue a very challenging piece for this band, but they did a great job with that, and I'm very grateful for their time with us. I do need to thank several folks, Mr. James, of course, Mrs. Medley, for the work you've done with your bands. Of course, Mr. Boston, I appreciate the opportunity to come out here and work with these students. We've known each other for a little while, having seen each other at conferences in various places around the state, but I've really enjoyed this opportunity to get to know you even better and get to work with you during this process, getting to meet several folks. I always have respect for band directors that do this as long as Mr. Boston has. It's a long time. He is not only embedded in this community, but deeply cares about every single person on this stage. I think everybody I ran into in this town over the last 48 hours knows him or has been taught by him or something. I don't know. There's connections everywhere I went. And I think that's very special too, and something quite honestly you don't see all over the state. And again, echoing some of the words that Mr. Plant had mentioned as well, I love being able to do this. At UT, we get to benefit from all the hard work that comes before us. If it weren't for the band directors, I say this wherever I go, I get to conduct all over the state, all over the country, all over the world. And we benefit from the hard work that these music educators do before us. I always say we can't play Rocky Top if somebody doesn't teach them Hard Rock Blues, number 58 out of Essential Elements. I know that one very clearly. That doesn't happen. Parents, for you, I've got 4 kids of my own. They all have, band is not optional in our household, so I've been there through all the beginning times. Parents, I understand what that means as well, and the pain that goes through that. But to be able to get up here and do an event like this where you start to play really challenging music certainly gives credit to all of the hard work and the importance of music education in the community. I can't stress that enough. Support music education, support the music educators. In the private Southland Band has 415 members in it. 83% are not music majors. They're people that are going on into the STEM areas, into law, into medicine, nursing, you name it. They are woven into the fabric of every community, and without the arts, who knows what that community would look like. So I continue to urge you to support that. And if you can, just one big round of applause for all of our music educators that are out there. Thank you. Before we get to our last piece, I thought Cumberland Cross is a great piece to play, especially staying at home in Tennessee, being invited to come here and drive through what I would argue is some of the most beautiful country around. It's truly a privilege. Really enjoyed it. I told them I wouldn't mention this, but I'm going to have to. I think it's important I mention, you all have a serious armadillo problem. We haven't gotten those yet in East Tennessee. And as soon as I get up on the plateau, I'm like, well, that doesn't look like a tire. And you get a little bit closer, and it's not. They're everywhere. So I'm totally okay if you just keep them here. That's not a problem. But I do think it's important that as a public service announcement, I mention that. There's an issue. But anyway, hey, again, thank you for all of the energy you've given to these students and support. Continue to support them. I told the students, high school is not the end of your musicianship. There are bands everywhere. If you go to college, go play in a band, no matter what you're majoring in. If you're not going to college, go play in a community band. There are community bands everywhere. This is one of the few things in life you can do for the rest of your life. And I encourage them to do that well beyond their time here at these high schools. Thank you all for the invitation. I certainly appreciate it. Hope you enjoy our final piece, Cumberland Cross.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, the Loretto, Lawrence County High School, and Summertown High School bands.